There is a common misunderstanding that I hear from almost everybody on this. So I'm going to shed some light on it. On this journey, all we're hearing are things that are challenging our existing way of looking at things. And people will say, I'm just not getting it. There's so much. I'm identifying with the mind. I'm resisting this. All my trauma is coming up. I don't want to bypass that, by the way. That's something to deal with for sure. But the perspective in this is still mind identified. So the things that the mind is doing, I'm saying it's me. Or the mind is saying it's me, because there's ultimately this belief that the mind is me. This gets a little twisted, a little tricky. But this is where changing our languaging really helps. And when I start to say, I'm aware of anger, anger is coming up. I'm aware of resistance to this. Mind is saying, this is wrong. This is really helpful in starting to rewire these patterns of thinking. It sort of short circuits them. It takes the power out of them. Ultimately, in recognizing that the thoughts are happening, that the thoughts are not me, I'm not the mind. I'm experiencing the mind. The mind was even collectively formed through where my attention was placed. In a sense, consenting to beliefs. So if someone says, you are not smart, and then my attention continues to be placed on that. Oh, they said I'm not smart. That's really upsetting, and that impacts me, and I'm really going to think about this. This becomes its own little sort of aspect within this construct itself. And then I make decisions based on that. Or I should say, decisions are made based on that. Now, if somebody says, you're an idiot, and I say, whatever, and I move on, it's not impacting me. It's not impacting my experience. I'm not taking that on as identification. So at the root of all of this, identity has been taken on in the form of the mind, or the mind body. I'm identified with this vehicle that I'm experiencing. So when it thinks, when thoughts come in, attention is solely on them as my reality, which is like a layer removed from reality. If the thoughts are my reality, I'm not seeing cleanly what's actually going on. It's all being filtered through that. So when I'm saying, oh, I just can't get it. I just can't get it. I've been seeking for so long and it's not clicking. That's mind. That's not me. And mind is in service of its own preservation. That's what this is. When the mind says, oh, I just can't get it, and then I question that, is that true? That's still happening in the mind. But there's a shift away from the stream of thought until this point. Now a new paradigm, a new way of letting the human exist is sort of being considered. It's given the floor. So I test this, test the thought, recognize it's not true. There's a weakening of that, and a weakening of identification with the mind. The more I realize that I am capable of seeing through the thoughts of the mind, the more I must realize that I am beyond the mind, that I'm capable of greater discernment. I mean, the mind ultimately is not about discernment. Mind is regurgitating. If I'm capable of seeing beyond that and choosing differently, then the mind must be my tool, not my identity. What seems to take so long is the simple refusal, and this is mind, but attention being placed on the mind. So the continual attention being placed on a refusal to see things another way. Trying to get the mind to see things another way isn't how we even go about this. So there's all this struggle and passage of time that's being placed into this process. And the process is ultimately a deconstruction. We're not constructing anything. We're slowly seeing through all the things we've taken on that aren't true, all the thoughts that are coming up that aren't true. We're weakening this belief, this idea that I am the mind. This can take time. It most often does take time. But this is why I and non-duality teachers will say it doesn't have to. Because ultimately, we're not after some really elusive thing. It's about what is experienced in this moment when we see through identification with mind. This does not take a genius. It doesn't take an intellectual to understand it. Children understand it because they're living it. They're living it without filter. So something's getting installed from then until now. We're learning to uninstall it, to allow something else. This is why the more we think we know, the harder this can be. And the more the ego is invested in the idea of being smart or intelligent or containing lots of facts, there will be more resistance to being in the body, to observing what's really going on, to being willing to be honest with ourselves, brutally, ruthlessly honest with ourselves all the time, by recognizing that as these thoughts are coming up, they're never true. They're all based on illusion. So they may be relatively true within the illusion, but the illusion is subject to constant dying away and being reborn. All of it. To try to nail things down and really grasp them is a detour. This is why it's so funny. It's so funny when you get it, because you didn't need the intellect except to deconstruct itself. when we work with this stuff, it feels like work. And we're saying, I'm not making any progress. This is going to take forever. But as long as there's a willingness, a determination, and ultimately a wanting the truth more than wanting this illusion, and that can take some time to settle in. Like, what does that really mean? What am I really willing to let go of? Not give up. It's not that you have to lose things. It's that you have to be willing to. So there's all this work being done, and then you realize, I only had to do the work to realize I never had to do it. I had to sort of fail. I had to have the experience of failing in this lifetime with this so-called soul to experience again the returning to the truth, which is self-evident without filter of mind. This is a game. This is a little sliver of what's going on in this moment. When I realize deeply, when I live the knowing that I am not the mind, everything the mind says is so funny. All the struggles from this entire experience, at least as memory has managed to retain without skewing, all the suffering that has appeared to happen, that has been experienced, there's so much love and peace behind it that it's we have to be willing to acknowledge that maybe all of our suffering didn't really need to happen, that it's just a construct. It's belief, it's attention to the constructs of the mind. That to knowingly be myself is not to have any skin in this game, to not be subject to any kind of hurt. And then this is not a detached laughter. I'm not living in another world. I'm still here. I still have practical things that need to be dealt with. They're just not who I am. And in this case, all I want to do now is tell other people about this, and yet it doesn't really matter if I do. Because all's well. We are one. There's no other and there's nobody to save. There can actually be something very liberating, very helpful to conceding that maybe awakening doesn't happen in this lifetime, and that's okay with me. I'm okay with exploring this out of the spiritual urge, not an egoic desire to be entertained or to look for some kind of fulfillment. Beyond that, with no clinging, no needing this to happen. This process becomes joyful. We relax into it. We're much more well-positioned, much more likely to see this thing that has supposedly eluded us.